Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Ganav Vajramani. I currently work with Amzur Technologies. I basically manage the global technology and delivery function for Amzur. I'm going to actually focus a little on the application modernization and hyperautomation and composability in the whole tech space, but more in relation to the driving business objectives, right, for the enterprise. This whole digital transformation program that has been on the card. A lot of companies and enterprises have kind of started on the journey about 6, 7 years back. Some of them are still struggling. Some of them have been able to find that space where they could deliver those necessary business benefits. But I've been following this particular metric that Gartner publishes every single year, and top three topmost outcomes that the enterprise business folks basically expect of IT as business value is to basically enhance their customer experience. Two is grow the revenue and increase the market share. And three is to basically deliver their particular products and services as digitally as possible to the consumers, right? And these three have been on the card since last about 6 or 7 years that I've been kind of following this particular data set. This year, it's about 62% of all the CXOs still believe and feel, and they believe that the IT and the total operating model of the business is so legacy that they're just not able to get that necessary competitive advantage in the market because of that baggage that they have had, right? Now, having said that, our organizations re-architecting their operating models in IT, yes, but they're not hand in glove with each other to a large extent, and we can basically see that most enterprises, mid-market segments specifically, are focusing on technologies, traditional technologies as keeping the lights on, and then starting to build a new functional model around digital spaces, right? They're basically starting to kind of decouple that function in a way that if you see on the right hand side, the entire enterprise is basically structured into a utility model, like the front end, the middle office, and the back office, right? The middle office and the back office is what constitutes your operating model and manages the structural capital for the company, thereby delivering the business to its consumers, right? So the businesses are crying out loud as they are requiring the business capabilities that are driven by technology to be far more modular, expecting the business capabilities as package services. They are expecting technology and the operational processes to be so modular enough to be able to reassemble the assemble and reassemble the components to be able to create new value, right? And finally, expecting the technology to be so nimble and fungible enough for them to be able to become configuration centric as opposed to code centric itself, right? And we'll talk about that in a bit. We have seen at Amzur, and having worked on so many programs for clients and having talked to so many CXOs, a lot of enterprise and mid-market segments specifically choose to rehost their applications into the cloud for them. And a lot of businesses, they have basically identified the low-hanging fruits, and they said, okay, fine, we'll kind of reduce our total cost of ownership of our infra systems first by migrating or rehosting our application and the infrastructure onto cloud, right? Now, while that will basically give them the quick cloud ROI, it does not necessarily give you a significant uptime. It does lower time to market still. It's higher cloud service costs because in a rehost model, it is all or nothing, right? And it is not that you could choose components here and there. It is all or nothing in rehost, and you will land up with usually an all or nothing based on what actually needs to scale, right? Refactor your applications or infrastructure portfolio to the cloud, you're essentially migrating to cloud with cloud as infrastructure as a service, much like AWS or Azure or GCP or any other cloud service that you are utilizing. So if you depending on what you require as a cloud-based storage, computer, and network resources, you could reuse your investments that you have already made in your programming frameworks and the languages and the containers, and then utilize that cloud infrastructure that is being provisioned as infrastructure as a service. But then still, you don't necessarily have higher uptime, the automation of the CI/CD pipelines from a DevOps perspective, right? It is still very less modular, which means that you can't deconstruct and reconstruct your components in a flexible and a fungible way to be able to give the business that necessary edge for them to kind of go and expand in their particular markets, right? And the third and the fourth approach is re-architecting and rebuilding. And rebuilding is basically writing your entire application portfolio and rewriting the entire code to comply and be in that whole cloud native, right? And re-architecting is basically looking at all your application portfolio and deconstructing that entire application portfolio to the last unit possible as a component, right? Which basically takes us into the next topic of hyperautomation, right? So application modernization, specifically, if you are looking at giving your businesses that necessary advantage in terms of value, rehosting and refactoring will give you some edge, but that is only purely looking at from a technology standpoint. However, if you look at re-architecture or rebuilding your entire application portfolio, that we we generally don't discuss that without hyperautomation as a concept here, right? So, and hyperautomation is basically it's an approach that organizations use to rapidly identify, assess, right? To automate all their business functions, utilizing multiple technology stacks, whether it is artificial intelligence, machine learning, or computer vision or machine vision as they call it today, right? Then you have RPA, robotics process platforms. You have low code, no code platforms, right? Then you have intelligent business process management platforms. There are multiple things. There are multiple technology suites out there that you could use either individually or as integrated components to hyper automate. Hyper automation is purely, it means accelerated way of delivering your business capabilities to your business functions so that they add a lot of value for them to gain advantage in their respective markets, right? So the thing is, while we talk about application modernization and hyperautomation, we believe, specifically at Amzur, we believe that those two subjects of application modernization and hyperautomation cannot be justified without understanding composability. I talked about re-architecture and rebuilding. And in re-architecture and to rebuild, we've got to deconstruct your application portfolio so the technology stacks to the last unit possible, right? And that's composability. Composability is much like Lego blocks, right? So it's basically a system design principle that gives you the ability to combine multiple components in whichever fashion you need to be able to deliver a product or a service into to the consumer in the market, right? Coming to composability, the four key critical components to this. One is to identify, or they call it discover, identify one and the same. So, the identifying the components and the value in that process that gives that necessary value to the business, identifying those components as early and as fast as possible is the first step. The second is deconstructing that whole process, right, end to end, into multitude of components that that make up those Lego blocks is the second one. The third is identifying the synergies between those components that are composable enough, which is the last unit, right? Identifying and combining those components to be able to deliver a new service or a product to the business. And the fourth is basically developing that resilience while targeting those business units, right? So these are four key components. I mean, there are many in composability. I mean, I could go a little more deeper into the subject, but essentially, when embarking onto a digital transformation program to be able to add value to the business, composability is at the core of that journey, right? And without composability, trying to kind of assess what apps should be modernized and which apps will go through the hyperautomation phase of accelerated development or configuration without understanding composability will actually deliver results very inferior to the expectations, right? So how do we basically um, take advantage of composability based on how we see the tool set, the screwdriver tool set that has evolved over the period of last, 2, 3, or 4 decades or whatever it is, right? So initially, early mid 90s, late 90s or even early 2000s, the whole tech stack was monolith, as all of you know, right? No, and the screwdriver has got about three components. The base is the handle, the stem is the shank, as they call, and the top is the drill bit, right? So let's the parallel to that in technology is the handle is the technology and the application infrastructure, the stem or the shank is the process platform, and the drill bit is basically the process instance, right, which is being consumed by the consumer in the market, right? So taking that analogy into account, so this is how technology was developed, or apps were developed in late 90s, mid 90s, early 2000s, right? As the market started to progress, and because of lack of options for different tech stacks that were just evolving during mid 2000s or late 2000s, the technology is kind of developed into bespoke applications, and a lot of these software product providers basically, like, whether you take Oracle or PeopleSoft, or during those times, and all these IBM, Microsoft, they kind of launched a lot of projects that were so isolated and focused on a certain process platforms, and you had to kind of buy a license and all that stuff. But essentially, it is the same version of the monolith tech stack that you basically see as a mirror. There are multiple different technology and application infrastructures servicing similar process instances, but it is still the same, right? And that's when you see this whole screwdriver set, where the whole decoupling of the infrastructure and the applications started to happen. The process platforms started to kind of get consolidated to the vital few, what they call as a common process platform, and then the whole adapters, integrators, the extensions, and they were built, and then the process platforms or the process widgets, sorry, right? The instances started to kind of take shape. Now, almost all of you understand, if you actually see mid to 2010s, in the last about 7, 8 years, right? Things, okay, and before moving that, a lot of enterprises and mid-market companies specifically, when they talk about app modernization, this is what they're doing. They're actually trying to lift and shift their application and infrastructure portfolios onto cloud as is, right? Thereby trying to kind of gain some cost advantage with regards to a lower TCO, and then have their infra cost down as variable, right, as opposed to fixed, et cetera, right? But then trying to do a lift and shift, as we spoke earlier in the slide on rehosting and refactoring, it will only give you certain limited benefits, right? Not the entire stack of advantages that are required by the businesses for them to kind of, make that necessary move in their markets to kind of be competitive. And survive as well, right? Now, if you take that whole screwdriver gun, the handle, as we spoke about in the last slide, which is the technology infrastructure, is all pre-built. It's all cloud-based now. AWS has it, Azure has it, GCP has it, a lot of other cloud providers who partner with them and play on top of it, have it. Essentially, what now infrastructure has become much like a service. You can pick and choose components. Load balancing is there. You can bundle servers. You can bundle storage, switches. It is software defined. You can integrate appliances and combine the whole compute networking and storage into it. You can combine the whole virtual networking components into it. It's basically it's so composable to the last component that you could choose in regards to how you want the infrastructure to be defined. You could actually go to one of these infra as a service providers like AWS, Azure, or GCP, choose your particular components to prepare what your infrastructure looks like, right? Then you have the application type. This is where the heart of the journey is, which is in your hands, right? Which is on top of the infra, if we got to kind of provide that value to the business, as we spoke earlier, we got to kind of have that application portfolio on a composable infrastructure, and is essentially you have all these components, in terms of AI-based data diagnostic, the auditability, the exception handling escalations, the workflow orchestration. So you have tools and technologies like low-code platforms where they are all pre-built into the platform as a service, right? And all the tech components are bundled by the synergistic services that they provide as one package, right? So they're all pre-built into application platforms like low code or RPA, or and they're all cloud native or cloud compatible as well, right? So what are the business benefits? You basically are driving, utilizing something like a low code platforms that are cloud native or cloud compatible, and you're using that application to build your business applications to drive those business package capabilities or edge computing. You can basically have API libraries built into it, microservices, right? They are all your pre-packaged business capabilities that are co-created with the business, as opposed to building them in isolation of the business in a tech shop, right? So, traditionally we are used to actually taking some statements of work from the businesses to be able to build them to requirements. But the world has changed over the last about 5-7 years to be able to take advantage with sitting with the business, understanding the value of what their expectations are, and then looking back at the tech stack, deconstructing that entire application portfolio to components and reassembling these components to be able to deliver a new package of a product or a service back to the business, right? And most interestingly, all of the stuff today is basically delivered through multi-channel, right, experiences, whether it is a web app, a mobile app, whether it is through chat or through IVR. You can basically the whole social media integrations, right? So essentially, the whole illustration essentially talks about the evolution of the tech stacks from in the last about 2 decades, right, and where we are today. And once you organize that people practice and the process practice, which we call as the structural capital of an enterprise, is basically the whole operating model, which is the people, processes, and the systems. Once that is organized for value, and when I say organized for value, it is not organized in terms of this is an IT shop, this is an operations shop, and this is a business shop, right? It's not three different pieces. It basically all three are fused into one. Like, for example, Gartner calls them fusion teams, right? So, you've got to have fusion teams where the teams have inherently a business representative, an operations and a technology representative working on that entire piece of work, as opposed to the work moving linearly from the business to ops to technology and then back again, right? As I said earlier, typically most enterprises and mid-market companies still play tennis, whereas they need to be playing soccer, right? So that organizing for value is the first step. Second is, once you're organized for value, look at your entire architecture from the business to the middle office, which is ops, to the back office, which is technology and shared services and all of this stuff. Look at the entire business architecture to be able to deconstruct them into composable components, thereby identifying which components can be reassembled to provide the necessary value, right? And the third is the data. Data. We've talked about robotic process platforms in the earlier slide. The key difference between RPA, robotic process platforms, and low-code platforms, while they are both low-code platforms, RPA is more a rule-driven, right, platform, whereas low-code platforms are more data-driven platforms, right? So, the data composability identified and structured, right? Trying to reassemble components to provide that necessary business value may fall short of expectations, right? So that's one. The fourth is, development springboards. Now, while it says development friendly platforms, essentially we're moving on to application platforms that utilize low-code platforms to deliver the business value. They will move, we believe at Amzur, that in the next about 3 to 4 years, 5 years, the entire IT development shops will slowly move into being configuration-based shops, thereby reskilling and redeploying the IT people for more to focus on more business value, right? As opposed to just coding. Coding and IT development will be more centralized to people who are building SaaS products and products outside of the enterprise. Whereas within the enterprise, I think most of the IT developers would actually get redeployed to business value as opposed to just being development by taking advantage of these low-code platforms and AWS and cloud and so on. And I'm sure we have this consulting framework called Shape. What we do is whichever gig that we do with the customer, whether it is like a low-code platform work or services portfolio work, we basically do an assessment of the situation, right? And then we construct a hypothesis in partnership with the stakeholders in the company, in the enterprise, right? And once we construct the hypothesis to the problem statement that they're trying to solve, then we basically collect the data, analyze the data, and then try to kind of refine the hypothesis to ensure that the problem statement is being met. Whatever solution that we end up in terms of recommendations should actually 99.99% of the time should actually meet that value of the business that has come through the problem statement, right? So this is essentially the consulting framework that we use to drive any digital transformation program or any of the services portfolio that we have at Amzur. We at Amzur have our own local platform, which is much like, you probably would have, that basically does the job of modularity and composability to be able to deliver business applications at the speed of light, right? Just to give you an example, and I'm not exaggerating here when I say that, recently we kind of completed a delivery of a business application that was estimated to be like about 10 months. And then we kind of delivered that under 2 months with just about 400 lines of code instead of hundreds of thousands of it, if not millions, right? So, and that gives you, and that also gives you that necessary flexibility. If you don't want these particular features, you can basically disable them, and again, as I said earlier, reassemble the components, deliver new features like choosing, right, like checkboxes, and make that business process into production and a market launch directly to the consumers at an accelerated pace. So essentially, at Amzur, our digital transformation portfolio products and services include these, right? So we have Amzur's product platforms include, we are a NetSuite Alliance partner. We are an integration and implementation partner for NetSuite, specializing in 5 key sectors: manufacturing, logistics, transportation, etc. eTechie, we have an interview as a service platform, which is a marketplace for technical interviews. If you have, tens and hundreds of people that need to be interviewed. Our platform does that at a Jiffy. We have Evoke, which is an EV infrastructure charging platform. Now, all these products that you see on the left-hand side, they lend themselves to composability and modularity, right? So it is not like, you'll have to kind of, somebody will have to kind of come, take 6 months of implementation, does that and all the stuff. And now you choose, you have a problem statement, we'll assess it against that. You can actually implement those platforms because they lend themselves to composability and modularity, right? Which could be assessed and applied for delivery. Then we have our services portfolio, which is primarily around talent solutions, infrastructure operations, and managed services, which primarily focus on, again, composability, modularity in the context of digital transformation, right? So,
I got a couple quick questions for you. That was amazing.
this is my contact info, guys. As I said, my name is Gana Vadlamani, and you can reach me at gana.vadlamani@amzur.com or LinkedIn as Gana Vadlamani as well, right? So
that was really phenomenal. I got a couple. We're gonna have to run in a minute because there's just so much there. And I want you to go back to the slide. I think it was the one where you talked about the enterprise, the architecture of the enterprise itself. I think that was a key insight. You and I talked about that the other day. I found this fascinating, and I got a couple questions coming in. So we'll just chit chat for a second, then we'll do a couple questions, then we'll be done. But this is really fascinating how, because of the way technology is creating capabilities up front where they can handle the customer, and we talked about the enterprise operating model the other day, and capability. A lot of people on the call, actually, a number of people I know are actually enterprise architects. Ghana and used to be one too. And I know that what you're saying here is that the operating model in the front end, a lot of these activities that we usually would go to the back office, or you bring in the request and then it goes to the manufacturing plant, or it goes to the back office. That model is actually what's getting disrupted right now. Is that right?
absolutely. So a lot of you kind of touched upon, a really good point you touched upon, Alex. A lot of enterprises, right, whether they are banking and financial institutions, whether they're insurance companies, manufacturing companies, they are basically re-architecting the entire functional model or the operating model, right, around the business value as opposed to the typical traditional stack of,
Yeah.
this is operations, this is technology, this is shared services, right? So that itself is getting disrupted, with the key focus being on the capabilities that need to be developed and delivered to the consumer, as opposed to who actually is doing it.
Yeah. So then let's jump. Yeah, I think this is a huge insight. Believe it or not, I don't think we've heard this in a lot of our conferences, because you really stepped back and said, wait a minute, we got to look at what this, and if you get this concept, it's kind of a mind blower, because you start to realize what some of the folks that are on our panel actually are doing, because they're actually transforming not only, here's how I handle a customer, but the whole process, the whole business process itself is changing. And that's a big shift. And that's why these digital native companies have an advantage, which is why you got to go to a digital first platform, or a native platform, which is really your whole point. Which is correct. You got to be on a native platform where you won't take advantage of this, as well as all those features and functions that you guys bring to the table in your platform. I hear you there. Am I hearing that correctly? This is a big issue. So let's go to your toolbox here, which I love that one. The one that's the not the building one, but the one that has everything. This thing is amazing, because what you've done on one chart is basically said, look, this is the kind of platform that you really need to be composable. Now, I got a question about this. We've heard discussion in another event where people were talking about, I mean, if you look at what Amazon really did, right? I'll take Amazon. They did this. They created a composable business model for people to come in and just use all the functions. They didn't have to create any of this, right? And I think a lot of us are, even if you want, I mean, I tell you, folks, if you want your CEO to understand why digital transformation is so you got the stuff right here. He's giving it to you. He's giving you the key ingredients why you better make this shift. I think this is brilliant. I think you've done a really amazing job. All right, so let's switch. I love this. This is what everybody, this is what I said you all want for Christmas. You can just flip through it. I like the slides. Just flip through it. There you go. Your consulting framework. Now, we talked about this the other day. You know, it's unusual that you have people who provide these platforms that also do services. It seems to me that the number one thing you got to decide is which applications to go with this route, because not all of them are required, I imagine, initially. So how do your services, if somebody comes to you and says, you know, how do I really find the right strategy to go digital, to really do the digital transformation right? You know, I've already lifted and shifted a lot of my stuff, but now I see at the end of the day, it's not native, and we're never going to get to compete with the guys that are nipping at my heels. How is this something you help them with, and how do you guys do that?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, again, you know, there are two or three different types of requests that keep coming to us most of the time, right? So depending on the size of the organization, so if it is like a mid-sized bank, you know,
Mhm.
obviously we'll spend some time with them to understand what exactly they're trying to do to be able to help them from a consulting perspective, right? To be able to help them create a business case, right? If it is a small firm, which is like, you know, under 20 million revenue, or you know, with just about 100 or 200 people, and they're just trying to kind of get a handle on being faster to market and want to kind of re-architect that technology stack. I mean, they can get in touch with us. You know, we
Mhm.
basically more than happy to kind of work with them, understand, we'll apply some frameworks, right? No, obviously, like a lot of customers, technology guys, they get caught in this digital fog. There's so many things out there, right? You know, what to use, how to prioritize an application or a portfolio of applications, and which ones will actually provide the bang for the buck, right? You know, we basically help them with certain key frameworks, um, take them through those frameworks and help them identify based on certain criteria at a very simplistic level, get
Yeah,
them to prioritize based on value, you know, speed to market, total cost of ownership, etc., and then get them to use that information to build the business case to provide that to their particular sponsors in business, right? So
you want a system that you can, you know, once you get used to it, you can just kind of redesign. Is there a business of the future more like Amazon? Is there going to be an Amazon for transfer pay for all these core? Because, you know, companies, if you look at the chart capability, Ghana chart, there's only a few things on those charts that are unique. Your
yeah,
logo, right? Your advertising. I mean, as this one guy studied, Dan Kennedy, he said, "Glop is glop. All the pimple medicine is pimple, the same stuff." You know, I mean, honestly, Ghana, is there going to be just like one big factory at some point, and we just go in there and put our coins in, and then we sell them? I mean, that's what Amazon did. Yeah,
the thing, because there'll be 80% of the budget airlines that are more profitable than the full service flights, right? So, you know, everything is going to be a service, right? So, you know, and fairly so, because you know, and it basically, because it's a service, it's going to be as a service model. The IT functions within an enterprise actually will thrive well as well. Today, what's happening, Alex, is that the IT functions within enterprise are more driven by the budgets that are decided or given by the businesses year on year, right? But with this model, right, of composability driven by
yeah.
composability, IT functions could actually build their platforms in a way where when the businesses consume certain information or data, they'll have to provide service, thereby recouping all the investment that they have made in the platform over a period of time, and plus some extra money that they could make to basically, you know, invest in research and development or innovation as well.